What is the smallest detail in an old photograph that can quietly change everything you think you know? Two little girls stand side by side in matching white dresses, their arms linked, smiling into a camera in a Chicago studio in the summer of 1919. It looks like the sweetest picture ever taken, until you look down at their feet. The shoes do not match, and that tiny, easy-to-miss detail opens the door to a story much darker than anyone ever expected. Before we walk through that door together, do me one quick favor. If you love stories where a single small clue unravels a piece of forgotten history, hit the like button right now. Hit subscribe so you never miss another deep dive. And if you know someone who loves a good mystery, share this video with them. It takes 2 seconds, and it honestly helps me keep making these videos. Okay, now let's really look at the picture. Two girls around 8 and 9 years old. Identical white dresses down to the lace collars and the puff sleeves. Identical curled hair pinned the same way. Smiles that were put on for the occasion because they were. Behind them, a painted backdrop of a garden, the kind of scenery that was popular in portrait studios all over America in those days. Everything about this photograph was designed to say one thing: these children are fine. These children are thriving. These children are loved. Except for the shoes. The girl on the left wears polished leather button-up boots. New. The kind a family buys for a special occasion, the kind that costs real money in 1919. The girl on the right wears something else entirely. At first glance it looks similar, but look closer. Rough canvas stitched by hand with uneven seams. A toe box that sags a little. A sole built from layers of fabric instead of leather. These are not store-bought shoes. These are institutional shoes. The kind made in workrooms when budgets run thin. The kind that children in orphanages and detention homes wore as standard issue. One girl in fine new boots. One girl in handmade institutional shoes. Same dresses, same photo, same claimed family, different shoes. That one mismatch is the detail that refused to leave the mind of an archivist named Evelyn Marsh. Evelyn had worked at the Chicago History Museum for nearly 2 decades, cataloging thousands of photographs from the city's early 20th century. She had seen portraits of every kind: weddings, funerals, graduations, family reunions, and thousands of studio portraits of children. And she had a professional rule she lived by. In old photographs, the details that do not match are usually the details that matter most. This photograph had arrived in a donation box from an estate sale on Chicago's South Side. It came mixed in with old ledgers, faded correspondence, and promotional materials from a long-defunct child welfare organization called the Illinois Home Finding Association. On the surface, the box looked ordinary, boring, even. But Evelyn knew from experience that old documents never stay boring for long. She studied the girls again, their posture, their expressions. The girl with the good boots looked straight into the camera with the practiced ease of someone who has been told to smile many times. The girl with the canvas shoes looks slightly off to the side. Her smile is tighter. There is a stiffness in her shoulders. Evelyn had seen that expression before, in photographs of children from orphanages and industrial schools. It was the look of a child told to smile, but not entirely sure why. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Moyer twins, placed together. June 1919. Success story for annual report." Twins placed together, success story. 3 phrases that were about to fall apart, one by one. Because if these girls were truly sisters from the same family, Evelyn reasoned, why would one of them be wearing brand new leather boots while the other wore homemade institutional shoes? Twins raised in the same home would have been dressed the same, head to toe. The sameness is what made the picture cute. That is what made it perfect. And the shoes broke the illusion. Once you notice a break like that, you cannot unsee it. Evelyn set the photograph down carefully and made a decision. This was not just a pretty old picture. Something here was wrong, and she was going to find out what. To understand why those 2 shoes mattered, you have to understand the world those girls were born into. And honestly, it is a world most people never learn about in school. It starts in 1853 in New York City with a man named Charles Loring Brace. Brace was a minister who had watched thousands of homeless children wander the streets of Manhattan. The city had no real system to help them. So Brace started the Children's Aid Society, and he came up with an idea that would change the lives of 250,000 children. Instead of leaving them on the streets, he would put them on trains and send them west to farms and small towns across America where families could take them in. Between 1854 and 1929, historians estimate that somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000 children were loaded onto these trains and shipped across the country. The newspapers called it the orphan train movement. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Many of those children were not orphans at all. Many had parents alive and desperate, parents who lost custody not because they were cruel, but because they were poor. One bad year, one illness, one factory accident. That was all it took for a child to be taken away and sent west on a train. The children were gathered in halls and lined up on platforms. Families walked along the lines and picked one, the way you might choose a dog from a kennel. And make no mistake, the families who took these children were not required to treat them like their own. The arrangement usually worked like this. The family would feed the child, shelter the child, and send the child to school. And in exchange, the child would work. Girls did housework, laundry, and cooking. Boys worked in the fields and in shops. The language around it was beautiful. It was called Christian charity. It was called saving souls. But functionally, in thousands of cases, it was a labor placement system for children. And the agencies that ran this system needed money to operate. So they marketed themselves the way you would market any product. They needed something that opened wallets. And in the 1910s, nothing opened a wallet faster than a photograph of a happy child. That is the world the Illinois Home Finding Association lived in. The agency was founded in 1907 by a group of Protestant church leaders and progressive reformers who genuinely believed they were rescuing children from terrible institutions. Their motto, printed on all their materials, was about building Christian families through child placement. For the first few years, they did what many child-placing agencies did. They found homes for children in and around Illinois, farm families mostly, and they advertised their work heavily in church bulletins and rural newspapers. Here is how the placement pitch usually went. A family would contact the agency and say they wanted a child. The agency would check the family's references vaguely. The agency would promise the family a source of domestic help in exchange for Christian guidance. Did you catch that? A source of domestic help. In exchange for Christian guidance. The child was the help, the guidance was the payment, and once the placement was made, the agency had almost no oversight, no visits, no check-ins. A child placed in 1919 might not be seen again by anyone from the agency until the contract ended years later. Now here is where twins come into the picture, because in the world of child placement marketing, siblings were gold. The pitch was simple and effective. Take two children and they can comfort each other. They will not be lonely, and the family gets twice the help for only a modest increase in cost. Sibling groups were the premium product of the child placement business. Donors loved them. Families requested them. So in the spring of 1919, when the agency's director decided it was time to produce a fresh annual report with photographic evidence of successful placements, he knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted twins. Colorful, smiling, photogenic twins in matching dresses. The problem? That spring, the agency only had a handful of sibling groups available, and the ones they had were boys. And boys rarely appealed to families looking for domestic help. The bookkeeper even noted it in a letter. Focus the promotional efforts on individual girls, because that is where the demand is. Yet somehow, by June of 1919, the agency had produced a photograph of twin girls in matching dresses, arms linked, smiling at the camera. Which raises the question sitting at the center of this entire mystery. Where exactly did those twins come from? Quick pause here because I want to hear from you. Have you ever found something in an old photograph that made you stop and stare, a detail that just did not add up? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And while you are down there, do the 3 little things that keep this channel alive. Like this video if it is earning your time, subscribe if you have not yet, and share it to a group chat full of friends who love weird history. Honestly, 30 seconds of your time changes everything for me. Now back to the mystery. Evelyn went hunting for the answer. She started with the photograph itself. On the front, there was a stamp from the studio that took the picture, a commercial operation that ran on South State Street in Chicago from around 1915 to 1923. In those days, South State Street was the heart of the city's commercial photography district. Studios like this one did not just shoot families. They shot schools, businesses, charities, and institutions. If an organization wanted a picture that made its work look noble, it hired a professional studio to manufacture that picture. That is the industry this photograph was born in. Next, Evelyn went to the public records. She searched Cook County vital records for Moyer twins, girls born around 1910 or 1911, which would make them 8 or 9 in 1919. She found 3 sets of Moyer twins in that window, and none of them worked. 2 sets had died in infancy. The third set, boys. No Moyer twins, not anywhere in the county. So she widened the net. She went through the ledgers of orphanages and children's homes across the city, records now digitized at the Newberry Library. She found nothing under the name Moyer. She checked the state soldiers and sailors' children's school. Nothing. She checked the Protestant orphan asylum. Nothing. And then, buried deep in the intake files of the Cook County Juvenile Detention Home, she found a girl named Lena Moyer, age 9. She had been transferred from the detention home to the Illinois Home Finding Association in May of 1919, 1 month before the photograph was taken. The file listed her mother's name, and one detail stood out above everything else. No siblings, no twin, nothing. Evelyn pulled the census records next. In 1910, Lena Moyer appeared as a 1-year-old living with her mother Alice in a tenement on Chicago's West Side. Alice Moyer worked in a garment factory. There was no father listed. There were no other children. In 1920, the census showed Alice Moyer as an inmate of the state reformatory for women. And Lena? Gone. Vanished from the public record almost entirely. So Lena Moyer was a real child. A real 9-year-old girl, alone, placed by this agency in June of 1919. Which forces the obvious question. Who was the other girl in the photograph? Evelyn went back to the archive and asked whether any more materials from the agency had survived. It turned out a small collection had been donated decades earlier by the daughter of a former board member, and it had never been fully processed. Evelyn spent 2 days digging through brittle letters, financial ledgers, and bundles of photographs. She found contracts, hundreds of them, standardized forms with blanks filled in by hand. The title on each one read, Agreement for the Temporary Care and Christian Training of a Child, and the terms were always the same. The family would provide food, shelter, and schooling. In exchange, the child would perform domestic or agricultural labor. No wages. Contracts ran 1 to 3 years, renewable. At the end, the family could adopt the child or return them like merchandise. And then Evelyn found it. A second print of the same photograph. Same 2 girls, same dresses, same garden backdrop, same mismatched shoes, but this copy had a different inscription on the back. It read, Lena M. and Dorothy K. Successful Double Placement Demonstration for Donors, June 1919. Read that phrase again, double placement demonstration. This photograph was not a family keepsake. It was a demonstration for donors. 2 unrelated children dressed and posed and photographed to demonstrate the agency's product. That inscription is the single most honest sentence in this entire story because it drops the mask completely. These children were inventory. The photograph was the product catalog. Evelyn went back to the detention files and found Dorothy K. in full, Dorothy Kowalski, age 8. She had been transferred to the agency in April of 1919 after her father died in an industrial accident and her mother was hospitalized with tuberculosis. No siblings, no family to take her in. Stop for a second and sit with what that means. Lena arrived at the agency in May of 1919. Dorothy had been transferred there a month earlier in April. There is no record anywhere that those two girls had ever met before the day of the photograph. And yet there they were, arms linked, dressed alike, frozen together in front of a painted garden. Two strangers. Two children whose only crime was being poor and alone, with nobody left to fight for them. Brought together for a single purpose, to look like sisters. And here is what a double placement really meant to the agency. One family, two children. To the family, it was pitched as efficiency, two helpers for barely more than the cost of one. To the donors, it was pitched as compassion, two souls saved with one generous gift. To the agency, it meant two cases cleared in one transaction, two problems moved off the books, and a photograph that could be printed in the annual report and mailed to every church and charity committee in the region. Everyone in that arrangement got exactly what they wanted. Everyone except the girls, who got nothing but borrowed dresses and a story that was never theirs. They did not even keep their own names in the record. They became Lena M. and Dorothy K. inventory labels, Exhibit A and Exhibit B for the donors. Lena Moyer and Dorothy Cow. Alski were not twins. They were two unrelated girls, pulled out of the detention system, dressed in matching clothes, and locked arm in front of a painted garden to manufacture the lie of a sibling placement. Now, why were the shoes different? That is the question that started everything, and the answer matters. The agency spent real money on those dresses. They were new, purchased specifically for the photograph, part of a small wardrobe the agency kept for promotional purposes. But shoes were expensive. Two pairs of matching leather boots in children's sizes for a single photograph. The bookkeeper would have laughed, so the agency made do with what they had. One girl got the good boots. The other wore what she already had. And here is the cruel detail. Lena had been inside the system long enough to receive the standard issue. Canvas shoes, stitched from scrap fabric in the institution's own workroom, where girls sewed shoes and mended clothing, and boys worked in the carpentry shop and the garden. It was considered rehabilitative labor. The system literally manufactured its own poverty, and Lena was wearing it on her feet. Here is the deep irony of the shoes. The mismatch was almost certainly an accident of budgeting. The agency never imagined anyone would notice. But the shoes reveal exactly what the photograph was built to hide. The dresses were a costume, the smiles were a performance, and the canvas on Lena's feet was a slip of the curtain showing the machinery behind the stage. For more than 100 years, viewers looked at this picture and saw twins. They saw a success story. They saw charity at work. The agency got exactly what it paid for, except it could not control everything. It could not make the shoes match. And a century later, that is the detail that finally told the truth. This is the part where the story starts to hurt, so before we go there, make sure you are locked in. Tap subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter is the one most channels will not touch. And if this case is getting under your skin the way it is getting under mine, share it now, before you forget. One share can put this forgotten story in front of someone who needs to see it. Think about what that June morning in 1919 must have been like for those two girls. Two strangers in a strange building. Maybe they met that very morning. Maybe they met an hour before. Their own clothes were taken. They were dressed in white dresses that were not theirs, with lace collars and puff sleeves that had never belonged to them. Their hair was curled and pinned by someone who was in a hurry. Then they were led into a room with a painted garden, told to stand close together, told to link arms, told to smile. A man put his head under a dark cloth, held up a flash, and the moment was captured forever. The girl in the boots looked straight into the lens with a smile she had practiced. The girl in the canvas shoes looked a little to the side. Her smile was tighter. Her body was rigid. She had learned the lesson that children in institutions learn fast. Adults want you to smile, so you smile. You do not ask why anymore. You just do what you are told, because somewhere along the way you learned that asking gets you nothing. Neither girl chose to be in that photograph. Neither girl chose to be a twin. Their real families, their real histories, their real names were disappearing, replaced by a story that was useful to someone else. That is what makes this image quietly devastating. It is not a lie that got caught. It is a lie that almost worked. It worked in 1919. It worked for 100 years. It sold a false success story to donors, to families, and to the public, while the two girls at the center of it carried the truth on their feet, where almost no one thought to look. Evelyn spent months trying to find out what happened to them. She traced census records, city directories, and cemetery records, the slow archaeology of a forgotten life. And what she found is the part that stays with you long after the video ends. Lena Moyer was placed with a family in rural Illinois. She worked for them for years. In 1924, she moved to Indiana where she worked in a hotel laundry. She married briefly in her 30s. The marriage ended. Lena Moyer died in 1967 in a county nursing home. She had no children, no listed survivors. Her death certificate lists her occupation as domestic worker. 5 words. That is the entire public record of a life. Dorothy Kowalski's trail was harder to follow, but Evelyn eventually found her death record in Milwaukee from 1953. Dorothy had worked as a housekeeper for different families throughout her life. She never married. She was 42 years old. Her adult life compresses into a single line on a certificate. 2 girls, photographed as proof that charity works. And the system that used their faces to raise money was the same system that directed them into a lifetime of low-paid domestic work. They were not adopted into loving families. They were placed into working arrangements dressed up as homes, and when they aged out, when they were too tired or too sick to be useful, there was no one left to advocate for them. Their families had been erased from the record. The system had seen to that. Now here is the hardest truth of all. This was not one bad agency in one bad year. Evelyn kept digging after she found Lena and Dorothy's story, and she found the same pattern everywhere. In the records of other agencies, other cities, other decades, children as young as 6 contracted to work 8-hour days in domestic service. Correspondence from families demanding replacements when a child fell ill or refused to work. And she found resistance too. In the papers of a Black Baptist church on Chicago's South Side, Evelyn found letters written in the early 1920s by a pastor named Reverend James Mitchell. Mitchell had organized parents and community members to fight the placement agencies, arguing that they targeted poor Black and immigrant families, and that the so-called Christian homes were often places of exploitation. His letters went to city officials, to state legislators, to the governor himself. Most were never answered. In one letter from 1922, Mitchell listed children from his own congregation who had been taken from their families and placed by these agencies. He wrote, "These children are not orphans. They have parents and grandparents who love them and want them home. The agencies say they are saving these children. We say they are stealing them." He was right, and they were not stealing them for love. They were stealing them for labor, for the appearance of success, for the donations that success would bring. Evelyn turned all of this into an exhibition at the museum. The photograph of Lena and Dorothy was the centerpiece. Next to it hung an enlarged detail of their feet, the canvas and the leather, side by side, so that every visitor could see what a century of viewers had missed. The shoes took up an entire panel. And here is the thing that surprised her most. When the exhibition opened, people did not walk past it. They stopped. They leaned in close, studying the seam of a canvas shoe like it was a crime scene photograph, because in a way it was. And some visitors cried. Descendants of placed children came forward, some seeing images of their relatives for the first time. One woman told Evelyn that her grandmother had been placed by an agency like this, and that she always said, They dressed me up and turned me into a prop. I never felt real in those pictures. Prop, that is the word. That is what Lena and Dorothy were in June of 1919. Two props in a promotional photograph that was never about them. It was about the donors. It was about the money. It was about a system that needed to look like it was saving children while it moved them around like inventory. So here is what I want you to take away from this story. When you look at an old photograph, really look. The details that do not match are often the truest details in the frame. The mismatched shoes, the tight smile, the eyes that do not quite meet the camera. Those are the things the system could not control. Those are the things that survived. The truth is almost always there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. Lena and Dorothy were never twins, but they were bound together anyway by a system that saw children as problems to be solved and labor to be harvested. And that system did not end in 1919. It changed its name. It changed its language. It found new justifications. But the photographs are still out there, scattered through archives and estate sales and family albums, waiting to tell their stories to anyone willing to look closely enough. The next time you see a sweet old picture of a smiling child, pause, look at the shoes, look at the hands, look at the eyes, because every photograph is a story someone chose to tell, and sometimes the truth is hiding in the one detail they forgot to control. If this story moved you, do one thing for me. Share it. Send it to someone who loves history or someone who needs to hear it. Like it so more people get to see it. And subscribe so we keep digging up the stories everyone else walked past. Lena and Dorothy never got to tell their own story. The least we can do is make sure the truth about them is not quietly forgotten again. That is a gift we can give them 100 years late. And the next time you find yourself in an antique shop, or a dusty corner of the internet, or your grandmother's attic, holding an old photograph with something just a little bit off about it, take a second look. You never know what tiny detail is waiting to tell you the truth. That is the real lesson of Lena's shoes. The truth is almost always there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. And now you notice. See you in the next one. Stay curious.